why we're doing this, what our expectations are from it, give you more information on a pilot test of this approach that we did with the CCD data collection for 21-22, a little bit about the schedule and what's next, and then have Q&A at the end. That said, Alec is monitoring the Q&A, and if you have a question that's related to a specific slide, don't be shy, just add it in, and hopefully we can answer questions contextually as well as we're going through. So let's talk first about the goals of EDFacts modernization. Goal 1, state ownership of data quality. Over the years, as the program offices have executed more and more post-submission DQ, the ownership of data quality has shifted more to something where Ed does all the checks and then gets back to the program offices. But we really, goal number 1 is to shift that over back to the state side. Goal number 2, have high quality usable data as of the due date. Right now, for almost all of the files, I think probably all of the files, there's an initial due date, data quality review, and then a final due date. The goal here is to eliminate that second period and have the data be high quality and usable as of the due date. And the third goal here is a rising tide that we really hope will support both program offices and states. We want to decrease the cost and burden of data quality by eliminating this resubmission period. There's a lot of cost and burden on the program office's end. It's a burden for the states to address data quality concerns months after they've submitted the files. We really are optimistic that when fully implemented, the EDPAS approach will meet all 3 of these, will help attain all 3 of these goals. So I've already used our jargon, the EDPAS jargon. It's the term we're going to be using throughout this. It really is the first big step in EDFacts modernization. And EDFacts has evolved over the last 15 years, but it hasn't really had a big modernization. This is a really big change. Just one note, actually it's a pair of notes. It is branded as EDPAS because states have to pass the business rules prior to being submitted. And I'm sure that no one will be sad to see that there are no italics involved, unlike EDFacts where you're constantly having to manually add that the extra italics in. There's no italics in this. So why modernize now? I mentioned earlier that as time has gone on, there have been more and more data quality reviews kind of added for this submission period between the initial submission and the final close date. Right now, by definition, the data quality are not usable at the due date. There's always this assumption that there's going to be this cleanup after the fact during that open period. I think everyone on the phone can agree that there are some inefficiencies with the data quality processes as they currently are. We pull in for many of these, we pull down data files, we build data quality workbooks, or other contractors build data quality workbooks. We aggregate all that information. We ship workbooks to states with data quality questions. They respond in the workbooks or they resubmit the files, but we're not talking about a super streamlined, efficient process. In some cases, states don't actually even know the standards against which their data will be judged until after the data are submitted because of shifts in the business rules. And I've alluded to this, but there is this lag in post-submission between state submissions and the data quality review. There's multiple submissions, multiple systems for submission and multiple methods for data quality review. We've got the DMS for CCD. We've got OMB Max for the OSEP files. We've got Excel files and the consolidated data quality reviews for the files that come in December and in February. And again, kind of pointing to some of these inefficiencies, and that this really ultimately causes delays in the publication of the data. There's just a lot that has to go on after the data files are submitted. There's also some technical reasons that make this a really logical choice, because technology has changed since this system was built. Cloud computing, which is what we'll be using for this application, much less expensive. It also is very efficient in terms of processing, because they can, and I'm using a term that's not mine, they can spin up other servers and have the whole thing use the right amount of capacity instead of having a set amount of capacity, which comes into play, for instance, on due dates when states are submitting a lot of data at once. The modern apps are much faster and easier to build and change. EDFacts I was using 15 years, but it's actually 20 years old. An average system's life is 10, so it's showing its age. There's some security things that will be fixed in the process. As everyone knows, cybersecurity is just an ongoing challenge, and being linked in with the cloud computing, there will be a lot of benefits from that. And also, as part of that, the federal security requirements have changed significantly, and we really have to modernize in order to address those. So that's the why now part of the question. But what will change? And so the next few slides are going to talk about what will and actually what won't change. The big change is that business rules will be applied before the data are submitted. And the states will be doing that by uploading the data into we internally are referring to it as a sandbox space, but they will upload the files there. In this sandbox, they will execute all of the business rules, and they will add comments to business rules. At people familiar with this process, there's typically two ways to resolve an error. You can add a comment explaining why the error that was triggered is not actually an error, or states can resubmit data files to correct the error. In the current model, there is actually a third option that will be removed, which is not responding. So in this sandbox space, states will upload their data files. They will address the business rules, add comments, re-upload to correct things, all in this sandbox space. And when they're done, they will then hit submit, and the data will go to Ed. So that's addressing that first bullet there. The second bullet is work that is really near and dear to me right now. I know that many of the people on the call have been involved in this as well. We are, and I'm not exaggerating, pulling down all 1,800 of the existing business rules, all 1,500 of the existing business rules that have been developed over the years, analyzing them, determining if there are redundancies, determining if there is a more, if there is a more consistent way to provide errors and to analyze errors for similar files. We are rewriting all of the text to use consistent language so that two business rules that are firing, for instance, for a migrant file versus a Title III file might have, because they were written by two different authors, the language may be slightly different, but those are exactly the same rules, just on different files. So we're going to be standardizing the language. And a key element is this last one here. The business rules will be available to states much sooner. The goal really is to have the business rules available as soon as the system is open, so that or actually before the system's even open, so that when states are building their files and making the decisions internally as far as how they're going to aggregate the data to build these files, they know the standards against which their data will be judged. And then the last point there is very important. The due dates are going to be adjusted. What it's going to look like mostly is as if the due date has been expanded to include at least a piece of the legacy data quality review. So if a file was due in April, and I've got more slides on this that provide specifics, but if we noticed that we did this with CCD and the pilot, the directory grades offered files were due at the end of January. We switched the due date to the end of February so that the states had an extra 4 weeks to resolve data quality issues before the hard due date, rather than letting it linger. And Alex, please jump in if anyone has questions, because otherwise I'm just going to prattle on because I am blind. I can't see that stuff. So what will not change? The underlying file structure of EDFacts collections won't change. States will continue to submit aggregate data. They will be submitting that by the due date. They will retain control on when the data are submitted to ED, and they will maintain the unit level, student or staff level data on their side. That's never, well, I won't say never, but that is not, this change does not change that structure. The other thing that will not change is that the program offices and data stewards will continue to be the drivers of the business rules. The rules will be used in EdPass, but they will still be publicly available through the business rule single inventory, but they will really be something that is owned by the program offices in terms of content. So if program offices want a new rule, it would go through a similar process as before. And if you want to remove a rule, same thing. It's not up to us to decide, us being the EDFacts team, to decide what business rules are being executed. Ooh, sorry. So what is being, I don't know why it's doing this. If it was it. Okay, I don't understand why it's refusing to stay on that previous slide. The one with kind of the circle that it's going to flash to and go away from is a list of the content that is being consolidated into EdPass. And I'm going to give you some of these examples from my view of it, because I can read it there. I can't, for some reason, get it to show up for you guys. But ultimately, we're going to be really blending a lot of these disparate systems into one effort that will all take place prior to submission. So, for example, all the separate consolidated coordinated data quality reviews, the data management system that is currently being used by CCD will ultimately be rolled into this, the state submission plans, and the metadata surveys. So all of those surveys where an example of this is for OSEP, where states report what ages are appropriate for developmental delay. The idea here is to consolidate all the different components of data quality and data quality reviews into one location, which will make it easier for the states, but also, one login. Right now, we know that the states, no one loves having a bunch of different logins, but also so that they're much more integrated in terms of use and providing comments. So now it's gonna, oh, that's funny. For some reason, oh, there it goes. So the data quality review process, this is as it is right now. States submit data files into EDFacts. They often address the pre and post business rules in ESS, and then they resubmit or provide data notes. The due date comes. We take a data snapshot. We being the data management team, I know we do this for several program offices. We generate data quality workbooks, but we also provide extracts for program offices to generate other data quality workbooks and also send extracts to their contractors to get data quality workbooks created. We bring all of that together and do the CDQR, the Coordinated Data Quality Review, to send stuff to states all at once. We have our second close period, and then once and during that second close period, states send back their responses. They might update files, they might provide a comment, they might do a combination of the two. And at the second close, essentially the second due date, we take another snapshot of the data, and that becomes the final data. Those are the data files that are used going forward. Those are the ones that get the privacy protections. Those are the ones that have data suppressed based on the data quality reviews, and those are the ones that are published on EdData Express. They're the ones that are used for CCD. They're the ones that we use to create all the final files for all the OSEP collections, all kind of a part. But this is a lengthy process. It takes several months, even just between this due date and the close here, when we take the final snapshot as of the second close. So this is the reimagined process that will be implemented under EDPAS. States this, and I was describing this kind of abstractly, but I'm going to cover it again because it's a bit of a mentality shift, and it's probably worth repeating. So states upload, and the word here is upload very deliberately. They upload their data, their EDFacts data, and execute into this sandbox that I described. So it's sitting in the sandbox. It hasn't been submitted to Ed. It's in the state workspace. While it's there, the states execute all the business rules. They address the edits. They re-upload data to fix. They go, what we really like is when they look at the edit and say, oh, goodness, thank you for pointing this out. I have an error in my file. Let me resubmit with that error corrected. We get a bunch of that. We also get a bunch of cases where the state explains why the error we flagged is not actually an error in their case. An example of this that I use a lot because it's germane to a lot of files across a lot of program offices is we have a lot of edits that say if you have an operational school, an operational district, you have to submit certain files for that district. Well, in Colorado, they submit all of their special ed data to the aligned with the BOCES, that separate school. There's 168 of them, something like that. They're never going to submit their IDA data to their standard school districts. All the IDA data is always going to go to the BOCES. So they're going to work in this sandbox and upload files, fix things, respond to business rules. When they have addressed everything, that's when they hit submit, and they need to do this task prior to the due date. At the due date, now you notice there's only one due date here. At the due date, the data we will take a snapshot of the data, and that's the data that will be the data used, that Ed will use for EdData Express and CCD and all the other products. There's a gap in here a little bit because there's going to be some discussions about suppressing data. We're going to have to do the privacy protections, but the process has been significantly condensed here by eliminating by pushing all of that back and forth into the state's hands here as they upload the data. So you may be saying to yourself, what? No resubmissions after the due date? Well, the short answer is no, we hope not. We hope that states with the tools that we're going to be giving them will be able to resolve all of their errors prior to the submission due date. But we're also realists, and we anticipate that there will be a limited number of SEAs that need to make corrections. And we have a plan for that. So why would a resubmission be required by an SEA? They may need to finalize data. They have to have a subject matter expert weigh in on something. They've identified issues that were significant enough for a resubmission that were identified after the due date. The program office flags a case that they want additional information, a more detailed data note, for instance. A state has a significant issue and provided a kind of a meh data note. That might be something that you're asking for. But overall, the plan is for the day after, for immediately after the submission due date / time. So if it's due at 8 o'clock in the evening on a certain date, at 8:01, states will no longer be able to submit the data without a deliberate reopen that everyone agrees to. So how is this going to work? A lot of this has to do with outreach. We have a long history of I'm talking cumulatively of everyone on this call, program offices, us as contractors, ESB as the operators of EDFacts. We have a long history we have a guess of which states are going to be late, which states are going to have problems. It doesn't always prove to be 100% correct, but I think that we could all easily consult our Wayback Time machines and use past to at least anticipate states that might need some additional support. Many program offices have technical assistance resources that they can potentially deploy to help states who are experiencing problems. Maybe there's new grant conditions to fix the problem if more than one SEA is having problems with it. And then having standards for what the standards are to get the system opened again if you're a state and you want to do a resubmission. And as part of that, defining a correction period that's brief. It's not going to be, at least the vision is not that this correction period will drag on for weeks and weeks and weeks. But the idea is that it's focused to address a very specific problem for a state that they have made their case, or the program office has made the case that the system needs to be opened in order to correct that, allow the state to make the corrections to address that issue. So that follows on to the previous slide.
Hey, Beth, just want to hop in real quick. We got a question in the Q&A panel, our first one, from Letitia Braga. Here's our question. Some of our state data notes make comments about policy that are incorrect. So ideally, we could get them to refine the data note, or else we need to consider qualifying or deleting the note.
Good question. That is an example of something that would be addressed after the close, because we aren't going to be seeing the data notes in toto as the states are working in the sandbox. So that would be an example of something the deadline comes, the program office is reviewing the data notes, and state X says, I did it this way because of this legislative requirement. The program office says, well, that's completely wrong. You've actually even flagged that you're doing something really terrible. The program office would then work with the state. We'd work in the correction, we would work with the state to get themselves organized for the correction period. Because my guess is that when the state added that comment, they didn't understand the error they were making at the time. And so the program office and the state will work together, get that resolved, and then we'll have the reopen period. Karen, I may put you on the spot. I know you're on, to talk about what the final decision, because I'm drawing a complete blank. My recollection is that the state will be able to replace the data note with an updated version of the data note, but we will keep a log of those data notes. So the first one they submitted won't be gone, but it will be replaced in terms of the active data note. Did I describe that correctly, Karen?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So does that address your question, Letitia? And I realize I just asked you that and you can't actually say yes. So if you have a follow-up question, please put that in the chat.
And from a timing perspective, the state will have the opportunity to update any of their data notes before the due date, before they would submit for the final time for the due date. But if the system is opened back up for them for a correction period, so for example, if the program office communicated to the state, this is not an acceptable data note, it needs to be reworded. If authorization is granted, they could also correct that data note during a correction period as well.
Thank you, Karen. I did not make that completely clear. And that goes to that circle that I couldn't get to stay on the screen. The idea is that the data is integrated with the data notes and the state submission plan, so that, in fact, when we're talking about updates following the close, we're talking about all three of those components as things that they would be potentially making updates to resolve data quality concerns.
It does look like Letitia's followed up. First, she said, yes, thank you. She does have a follow-up, though.
Okay.
This may be coming, but is there a sense of what the timeline will be post-submission? So the amount of time we will have to review all these data notes to make decisions prior to the correction period.
We have some big picture slides coming up. A big picture slide about the timing and talking about the changes in the deadlines. But I do not believe that we have talked specifically about the window, for instance, between the close, how quickly program offices will need to make decisions and help get the states organized to do the reopen, all of that. Those timing questions still need to be completely fleshed out. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, because one of the things that I mentioned earlier, the CCD pilot. And so I'm going to spend a couple slides talking about things we learned from the CCD pilot. I'm going to just to explain why CCD was a logical choice for this. The CCD has the data management system in place, which is a tool that basically has all of the data quality edits online for states to see the day after they submit a data file. Well, you can suddenly see the similarities. It's not the wait 4 months after you, or 3 months after you submit a file to get your data quality reviews. You're not getting them instantly the way they will in EdPass in the sandbox, in the upload area, but they are at least getting them the next day. So CCD seemed like a good way to pilot test the approach, just to see if we weren't even sure going into it whether the whole thing would blow up. And just spoiler alert, the findings from the pilot are extremely encouraging for this effort. One thing that we did during the pilot was office hours. We held office hours. It was an open Teams invitation that the link was just in the weekly partner support update. PSC used their amazing powers to facilitate it and help keep everyone organized who was on the call. The program office, in this case, Chensu, was on to answer questions, as were the analysts on the CCD team. And we held the office hours just as an open invite for every Thursday for the month leading up to a submission deadline from 1 to 2. Obviously in the afternoon to accommodate the time zones. Sometimes a bunch of states dialed in and we just took them in order, but sometimes only one state dialed in. We kept the call open, we just all muted our cameras and we multitasked, and when the 2 o'clock hour came, we all just went on with our lives. So we were available. We weren't always used as much as we would like to think, as we had hoped, but the states that dialed in got questions answered on the spot. We had some states who dialed in not even to ask questions, but to just see the issues that other states were experiencing. We had one state, I think it was California, who had a very specific, I'm doing my file right now, I just have this one question. They were on for 5 minutes and done. We had some frequent flyers who came on multiple times. And then, as I said, there were some kind of sad office hours where we didn't get a lot of people on, but it was definitely helpful for the folks who dialed in. We also observed during office hours that states often wanted to ask questions about some of the CDQR stuff because they basically felt like, I've got someone here, I can ask a question. So in those cases, we had PSC follow up with the program office. So office hours, figuring out a way to do that. One other thing that we did during office hours was we would bring up states' errors just on the screen. We would ask them their permission to share them with other states because that was, we were basically at some level, I guess, airing their dirty laundry, but it wasn't, these are data errors. And we never had a single state be against that. With the model that we're looking at now, it would be perfectly reasonable to have office hours in the pre-submission time period when states are working in their sandbox. And in that case, because we don't have view access into their sandbox the way we were able to do with DMS, it would be likely that the solution would be for the state to share their screen to show the errors that they're getting so that the team, whoever's on the office hours for that file or however we organize it, would be able to answer questions for the state who raised the question. So takeaways from the pilot. Most states address their errors prior to the due date. That's the smiley face headline. Other smiley face headlines were that the phase 1 data was released in May of 2022, even though we moved the submission deadline to accommodate the data quality review, the pre-submission data quality review. The frowny face headline here is that we still had some states miss the deadline, which I'll talk a little bit about more on the next slide. It is our observation that states are getting the memo about data notes, but there's still room for growth. That data notes are more substantive than they have been in the past. We're getting far fewer of the confirmed the data are correct as reported, and instead getting substantive notes that explain why something changed more than one would have expected. As I mentioned before, the office hours were extremely helpful to the states that dialed in. And really the point we're making here is that we found that even with the extended deadlines, states can really clear all of their errors and wrap everything up much earlier than they could before. So the CCD files that were in phase 3, which includes free reduced price lunch that wasn't due until the end of May. Ordinarily, we would have done our data quality review the old style in July and August for those last CCD files. We moved the May deadline to the end of June and expected states to have resolved all of the issues as of the end of June. Well, that's a lot earlier than August. And so we are looking at CCD data files that, despite doing the pilot on this and moving the deadlines, we're still getting data files moving through the Ed Review system earlier than before. Last year for 2021, we delivered the same files on the first week in October, and we delivered them the third week in August this year. So there is, and the spoiler I shared before, which is that we didn't know what to expect from the pilot, but that overall it was really encouraging. So here's some of the key takeaways. Phase 1, we had 25 states who completely completed, I'm not sure I meant to say that, everything with little or no prompting. Some of them needed a little bit of nudging. We did a lot of stalking because we didn't know what we were going to be dealing with. For phase 1, which is preliminary directory and grades offered, we required no resubmissions after the due date. And so the data file that was released in March was the data that was submitted as the due date. But there were 2 states, Washington and Texas, that did not get their directory file in by the end of February, and they were not included in the release. I believe that got the attention of the state coordinators because there were a lot of teachers in particularly new and future schools calling them, asking them why they couldn't get their CCD ID numbers. For phase 2, which was the preliminary CCD, it was updated directory, CCD school, and membership. Those data files were released 2 months after the due date. But we were missing some data still. We were missing membership for 1 state and file spec 129, which is CCD school for 3 states. You notice that membership and directory and grades offered is not showing here because those 2 states got their data file in and it was included in the phase 2 release. And then finally, our final release, which is everything, we're expecting to release those files about 5.5 months after the June 24th due date. There were 5, I think it's actually now 6 states that had required submission past the due date, and we are still missing data for 1 state for FTE staff and 1 state for CCD school. But as you can see, the file spec 52 has been resolved, and 2 of the missing states for file spec 129 have since submitted data. So really, I mean, as I said, we weren't sure going into the CCD pilot what it was going to uncover, and it really was very, very encouraging. So let's look at the schedule, what we've done in the past, and what we're going to be doing going forward. So we are working towards releasing the BRSI, the Business Rule Single Inventory, for the entire 22-23 collection. Get that out there, and it's going to be sitting there unchanged, ready for states to use it as the standard going forward. The remaining 21-22 data files will all be submitted, I'll say the old-fashioned way, through ESS. So that's the first ones coming up are what we refer to as the November IDA files. This is discipline, exiting staff, those data files. So using that as an example, I'm not going to go through this with all of them. It's the old-fashioned method. We're going to get a snapshot right after the close. We're going to pull that snapshot down. We're going to develop the workbooks. We're going to send the DQ reports for those November IDA collections to the states, and it's going to look like the old model entirely. Same with the December CDQR, and subsequently in the spring, graduates, there's some other files drawn here. These are examples, because in the spring, CCD graduates and dropouts will be also done this way. Same with gun-free schools, which is coming up in the spring. So, so that's the old model. So the new model is to start, we're going to start collecting it the new way with school year 22-23, and the system is scheduled to go live. So the sandbox will be available for states for the directory grades offered and charter data files starting the end of January in 2023. And then then we're going to be moving some deadlines. And this is, Letitia, I mentioned that we have some kind of vague deadlines in here. There's going to be a lot more detail nailed down before we're actually doing this. But we're moving some deadlines because what's not on here is the CCD membership data files as well. So those are all going to be due. I actually believe that they're going to be due in June, but that the system is going to open up. The sandbox part of the system for those is going to open up in the spring. So you can see we're shifting, but it is our observation from the CCD pilot that even with this shift, we're still the first, under the new model, that first close date is still going to be earlier than the second close date was under the old model. So we're looking at getting data files out sooner, despite the shift. I've thrown a lot of content. It seems like I'm going to have a drink of water, but if people have questions, please type them in. I'm going to move on to I'm going to move on to what's underway. There's a lot going on to make this happen. I get a little bit of hives because January seems like a long time away, but it's not. It's going to be here in a flash. So what have we been doing? What have we been up to get ready for this and to really be working on this and get it done? We've held a whole series of focus groups. PSC has organized some really terrific focus group sessions, not only with EDFacts coordinators. Oh, well, the ones on the slide are with the EDFacts coordinators. We have several former EDFacts coordinators on our team who we've really tapped for their thoughts on this. And the EDFacts coordinators have given us information about their workflow, helped us think through the design for the new system, and given us feedback on different ideas we have as far as what we're trying. We've been doing a fair amount of communication to communicate across stakeholders. I know that there are people on this call who have heard information on this modernization. Hopefully this is answering some additional questions, but we've had presentations in EDGB. There's been a lot of information about this, but we did want to get everyone together and really start the ball rolling for everyone in the program offices. We've been defining the business rules for EdPass, and this is the effort that I described earlier of pulling down literally all of the business rules, looking at them, making decisions. The ones that we've done, that we've nearly completed the work on, are the old school stopper edits, which were the ones that kept files coming in at all. These were ones that there was something wrong with the file that kept that under the legacy system, they were stopper edits. They were ones that the file format was wrong, or it was referencing the wrong state. There was things that meant that the system couldn't digest the file, as well as the edits for directory and grades offered, which is that first wave of CCD data files. And we've worked with with OSEP to finalize the edits and the updates to the edits for the IGA child count files. We've also, I described earlier the discussion of, at the state level, rolling up their individual level data up to the entity data that they submit into EDFacts right now and in the future into EDPass. CEDS, the Common Education Data Standards community, has been really involved with us, and with us being the broad we. The SEA attendees in the EDS open source community have been working to build what are called connections, which map state data to this roll-up, and those are underway for development. The great thing is that not every state uses CEDS, but as more and more states do this, it's open source, and there's a built-in support community within the CEDS community to encourage states to use this tool. And it also means that there's going to be more and more standardization in how the data are rolled up from the student and staff level records to their EDFacts and EDPass reporting. And then we're developing EDPass. We're developing the screens, the wireframes, designing the designing the screens that the states will see, and implementing all of those screens on an ongoing basis. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes that may not seem evident, but there's a lot going on. So, why is it's doing this again to me? It won't let me. These are not my slides, and I apologize because it didn't do this when I tested it earlier. I don't know how to make it stay there. Okay, I'm going to just keep jumping back to it, and if people start to want to kill me, just send a note. So the first thing is this first one. The main priority is to finish the work on the business rules. We've got a lot to work on that, and I'm actually going to go back this way because I can see it on my screen.
Hey, Beth, I could try to share it on my end.
Yeah, could you? Because I don't understand why I can't stay on that screen. It did not do this when I ran through it earlier. Thank you, Alex. I should stop sharing, I guess. Oh, no, I guess I have.
Yeah, I'm just going to pull it up right now.
Okay, great.
And while we're switching over, can just the participants on here just let us know that you're understanding what we're talking about, or you need us to explain anything further. I just want to make sure that we're not boring you to sleep, and that we're being clear about what's going on.
Thank you, Liz. I appreciate that.
So if you could just type in hi or anything into the chat just to make sure that we know that everybody's still with us and understanding. Thank you, Shannon.
Is it not letting you do it either?
It's not. I'm just going to
just do it like that
so we can see the slides.
That choice did not occur to me when it happened earlier. This is
okay.
an obvious choice that did not occur to me. So the main priority is this business rule review. It's a big lift. There's a lot of business rules, and we really want to stick the landing on these business rules. We do want program offices to start bringing their TA providers into the loop on this, and we can provide additional information. But we do see the TA providers as one of our frontline tools to help all of this go smoothly. Think about how EdPass can help your office streamline the data quality and publish the data sooner. I think the point that Letitia raised about understanding the business rules, the comments states provided quickly and providing, understanding what you have quickly and getting back to states quickly so that they can have an open period that corrects issues you've identified that you want them to address. I think we all need to think about how to do that. It's going to be a lot of content, but we are going to really need to digest it and act on it quickly. Continued collaboration. We really want this session to be a starting point of conversation. And while I'm not suggesting that everyone on this call pepper us with every little teeny question that comes up, I really do want people to ask questions. We really do want people to ask questions. Collaboration also means that we're going to be sending revised rules back to you after we've done our main priority, the first bullet there. And so we'll need to work with program offices to finalize business rules. And this last one is kind of a dream. Think about the reduced program office burden post-mission. Think about what you're going to do with your time. And I feel a little bit like a snake oil salesman at this point, but I truly believe what I'm saying. Think about what program offices are going to do if you're not spending all of the time that you're doing right now for coordinated data quality review. It's not going to go to zero, as Letitia pointed out. You're going to have to read the data notes and figure out if states did what they needed to do and stuff like that. But this really should open up some bandwidth for other activities and other work, hopefully using the data. So the last slide before we go to questions is, oh, I'm not clicking, is the bigger picture. So what's the timeline and what's going on? So in winter, right now-ish, we're going to be doing user acceptance testing with the states to identify defects and issues with EdPass. We are also going to be working to bring in immediately a portion of the EMAPS collection is going to come in. So that's the SSP and the IDA metadata survey, but there are other metadata parts of it that will come in later. And the target, as I alluded to earlier, the target for opening EdPass for use by the states is January 2023, and that will be opening the sandbox for them to use to start doing their initial files. So those are the prepared slides that we have. I would like to, we've scheduled an hour and a half, so there's another 30 minutes of reserved time. I also understand Liz's point that people may be lulled to sleep out of just kind of too much information overload. But are there other questions that we can address?
All right. Okay. So we've got our question and answer slide back up, Beth. It does look like we had just kind of maybe an addendum to the previous conversation we had about data notes from Letitia. She said, okay, it seems this review period will be very important as we get one shot to clear up these data notes and need for correction. We usually have over 1,000 notes, so it will be helpful to consider how much time is reasonable to make decisions and factor in other work that program offices have happening during that period.
Is there anyone on from ESB who, like Liz or Sam, would you be able to put a little more meat on my somewhat vague response?
So this is Liz. No, but we can take this question back to our management. I don't want to misspeak, but I do know that we are planning to do some office hours, and that will help the review of, like, we'll be able to review some of the data notes during office hours with the states. I know that doesn't answer your question, but it's a little helpful, I guess. But we will take this question back and provide a more detailed answer.
Thanks, Liz.
All right. We don't have any more direct questions. A few folks checking in, saying they're here, saying it was helpful. I do have a message from Heather. As a former SEA staff person who submitted data through EDFacts, I'm pretty excited about this upgrade. Sounds like it'll make the whole process more efficient.
We agree.
Yes. Nodding, nodding, nodding.
And then just, I do want to add that we are planning on doing an EDFacts Modernization 101 for some of the state participants that may not have been in on all of the modernization stuff. I know the EDFacts coordinators are responsible for getting some of that information out to some of the different coordinators, and not sure how much that's happening, but we do want, like, NRD and charter and migrant. We do want these coordinators to also be included in modernization. So what we're going to do here in the near future is conduct a Modernization 101 webinar, and I will excuse me, introduce them to modernization as well as give them time to ask questions. And then we will include them in on all of our going forward after that modernization webinar. We will include them in on all our webinars that we're doing now. For anyone on the phone who would like to sit in on our webinars, we always post them in the support update. So make sure you're looking at the support updates so you can join. I know there's one this Wednesday. So feel free to send any communication to your contacts as well, if you would like them to sit in or just wait for the EDFacts 101 modernization webinar. And if you're not a part of if you do not receive the support update, shoot one of us an email, either PSC or myself or Sam, and we'll get you added to that communication.
Thanks, Liz. And I just want to call out EDFacts contact information. If you want to shoot us an email, is edfacts@ed.gov. We'd be happy to add you to that mailing list.
Alec, Letitia also had a note, says, I've been chatting a lot, but main question is about the BRSI rule timeline and development now. Letitia, are you talking about the 21-22 BRSI or the 22-23 BRSI for EdPass?
And Letitia, I'm going to give you an option to unmute yourself if you'd like.
It might be more straightforward.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, yeah, sorry. Yeah, that question was actually a little earlier, but in the initial slide, it seemed like the box was in August, September 22 for the 22-23 collection, which was a little concerning, but then the arrow kind of extended, so just wasn't clear what that meant. But it sounds like, again, you're doing your initial review and then you'll be coming back to us with the opportunity to review that set of BRSI rules. That'll be very helpful. So thank you. I think since I've got the mic now, just one other point on that review window. It does seem like this may make it easier to have a stable date for the initial process of review, which is great, since they'll sort of be submitting the information. Again, not entirely clear on how much of the cleanup is still going to happen prior to things coming to the program office, but so that might just be, again, something for us to understand in terms of when the program office folks are going to be most involved. Also, I guess just thinking about whether the timeline is going to be the same for everyone, given that there is a different amount of information sometimes on average by programs. You know, does it make sense to kind of stagger it, or is it going to be like a solid start and end date? So I know you all are working on all of this and it's a big task, so I appreciate that you don't have all the answers, but just, again, throwing it out there for consideration. The more that we know in advance, the better that we can talk on our end about trying to hold that time, you know, to not have things like monitoring happening, so that we can dedicate the time to this and not unduly delay things in terms of our review and do a quality job. So, I mean, the push here is just in service of really being able to try to, you know, do as much as possible, hold our calendars to dedicate to this work, considering everything else that needs to be scheduled out. And the more that we know in advance, the better that we can coordinate that. So thanks again for the consideration.
Great. Thanks, Letitia. Anyone else? Excellent. Well, barring any last minute questions, I think I'll hand it back over to Alec to wrap it up and give people back some time this afternoon.
Thanks, Beth, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Again, it looks like we've addressed as many questions as we have received, so that concludes today's presentation. As Liz mentioned, please be on the lookout for our biweekly support update and reach out to the edfacts@ed.gov email if you'd like to be added to that mailing list. Again, I'd like to thank everyone for your time and your participation today. Really appreciate it. And this recording will be made available at a later time. But again, I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Alex.